journey could begin almost anywhere. On a busy corner in a busy city, or in a crossroads country store, here in skyscraper, in the living room of a suburban home, for the magic of modern magazine. In every community at every level, they are an intimate part. Directly and indirectly through articles, fiction, and poetry, they have exerted economic thought. They have helped mold our ideas and ideals, our ethical and social concepts, our prides and prejudices, our likes and dislikes, our fashions, our work and our play. Today more than ever, the printed word is one of the greatest social influences on our way of life. The Ladies' Home Journal is a key to gracious living. It portrays and interprets a world enriched by the interest of women in all walks of life. The Saturday Evening Post is the best read and most trusted weekly magazine, one of the products of America's traditional free economic system. It is a magazine for all the family. One of the greatest blessings of our American economic system is the leisure it has given our people, and the means and things with which to enjoy this leisure. Holiday is designed and edited for progressive people who realize the great treasure they have in these leisure hours and are determined to get the most out of them. It stands out as a magazine that has from its birth looked ahead, a magazine of creative leisure. Jack and Jill, edited expressly for children, has long been part of the fun of growing up. It helps develop a taste for good reading that will more richly reward them as they grow older. Yes, the roar of the printing press carries its message to everyone, everywhere in America. It is the sound of freedom. You hear that sound in the huge new Curtis Publishing Company plant in Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania. You hear it in this building on Independence Square in Philadelphia. The Curtis Publishing Company, founded in 1883 by Cyrus H.K. Curtis, today employs more than 7,500 men and women, creating and distributing more than 320 million magazines a year. More than 53 billion printed pages, or enough to make a pathway of over 2 times to the moon and back. Our production story begins in the forests of Pennsylvania, which provide pulp for paper. Trees are a crop that must be reaped as it is reaped. As a result of the most scientific forestry and conservation program promoted and observed by Curtis, pulpwood is actually grown faster than it is used. Some trees are marked to be left as seed trees to help replenish the forest. Others are marked for cutting. They are marked because they have reached maturity, and by removing them, the growth of many younger trees will be considerably helped. By a special process called girdling, the marked tree is painted with a chemical that will cause it to die, cause its bark to loosen, and its branches to become brittle even before it is touched by the axe or saw. And when it is felled, much of the bark will fall off, and the brittle branches will collapse easily, causing little, if any, damage to the younger living trees nearby. The water, which is so vital to paper production, is borrowed from a nearby stream. Recognizing their obligation to preserve nature's resources, the mills make every possible effort by means of costly equipment to return the borrowed water to the streams as nearly pure and clean as it is humanly possible to make it. The conveyor carries wood to the chippers. 4-foot logs go in, tiny chips come out. The wood heads for the digesters, first step in reducing chips to pulp. Through a series of digesters, filters, and bleachers, the pulp becomes finer and whiter. Another major source of fiber is old magazines. Each year at our mills, more than 23,000 tons of them are transformed by chemical magic into fresh white fiber. The fiber's progress is tracked and checked by the Quality Control Department. These fibers are scientifically mixed with fillers, chemicals, and water before delivery to the paper machine. The pulp is now ready to be made into paper. At the head box end of this amazing paper-making machine, it enters as a mixture that is 99% water. It travels only a few feet on a speeding wire screen. Until, although still wet, it is already strong enough to hold together. It races through the many giant heating rolls where it dries thoroughly and is coated on both sides for a quality paper. Then is polished in the twin calendar rollers for a super finish and emerges only a few seconds later as finished rolls of paper every hour. As one roll is completed, another automatically begins, roll after roll. Every 24 hours, enough paper must be on hand to print more than 1 million magazines. Hundreds of tons of new paper must be kept in readiness until it is needed to feed the giant presses. Without slackening pace for a fraction of a second, the new roll is joined to the end of the preceding roll, and the paper races upward and over the rollers of the big presses. This, then, is the ultimate destination of the paper that began as pulpwood in the forests of northern Pennsylvania, to capture and hold the printed words that will become the Ladies' Home Journal, the Saturday Evening Post, Holiday, and Jack and Jill. But what about the contents of these magazines? Where do the ideas, the words, the illustrations begin? They begin in many places, in many ways. In the editorial offices, the editors of each publication, their assistants, and their staffs plan the contents of each new issue many months in advance. The contents of each issue are drawn from many sources, from material or ideas sent in by regular contributors, from unsolicited manuscripts, from staff writers, contributors, artists, and cameramen, from the laboratories and research departments of the magazines themselves. Here in the Ladies' Home Journal workshop, a trained staff is constantly testing and developing new ideas in fashion, food, interior decoration, and in many other fields of special interest to women, all with the goal of making home life more rewarding. Who can resist good food attractively prepared and served? The Ladies' Home Journal has long been famous for its beautiful double-page food spread. A new home is created. First, the various elements of style, color, and arrangement are worked out in drawings and models. The final reproduction in the pages of the Ladies' Home Journal will be a fresh, harmonious, and colorful interior that will inspire homemakers wherever the magazine is read. Holiday, too, is noted for the high quality of its reproductions, its stimulating layout, as well as for its interesting pictorial subject matter, captured on film in the four corners of the world. Frequently, the ideas that appear in print come from the readers themselves, young and old, who have important thoughts to express, and who send them in to the editors, and wait in happy anticipation to see them in print. For each issue of Jack and Jill, an additional heartwarming experience is in store. Here, too, is the printed word, but these children may never see it, only feel it with their fingertips. That they, too, may know the exciting adventures contained within the covers of this magazine, members of the Volunteer Service for the Blind painstakingly transcribe every issue of Jack and Jill into Braille. Without this help, thousands of children would never enjoy many pleasant hours of good reading. Each day, hundreds of manuscripts from a potentially best-selling novel to the first of an unknown writer come to Curtis Editorial offices on Independence Square. More than 200,000 a year. And every one of these must be read and promptly acknowledged. These magazines must continually search out new talents, new inspiration, and give encouragement. For this is their life's blood. In the course of a year, 60 to 70 new writers are discovered by the editors of Curtis magazine. And there is another story, even more exciting than fiction. The issue-by-issue story written by our advertisers. Basically, advertising is part and parcel of the American way of life and accomplishment. As the key to mass selling, it helped to bring mass production to its present high state of development. And this, in turn, has brought more and better things for more people at lower cost. Advertising has helped give the American people the highest standard of living in the world, with more leisure time than ever before. Through educating consumers' use of new modern products, it has actually helped to create this extra. Consumers have to be informed of the goods and new products available, and on their decision to buy or not to buy rests the fate of American business. To play its part in our dynamic economy, advertising first had to gain reader confidence. On Independence Square, all advertising is checked and questionable ads refused. For Curtis knows that just as successful advertising is a key to progress, the faith of the reader is a key to successful advertising. Vital also to the success of the magazines is the work of the research department, which performs important services for both editors and advertisers. What do readers like best in Curtis magazines? What kind of articles, stories, and illustrations do they prefer? The editors must know. The Curtis researchers find out. What do consumers want? How much and how often will they buy? Advertisers must know where their best markets lie and how to reach them. The research makes detailed studies of entire industries: housing, aviation, the automobile industry, travel, to mention but a few, to help national advertisers create markets and find customers for their products. But the story of what makes up the contents of each issue of a magazine is still not finished. Covers, illustrations, photographs, and cartoons are as essential to these magazines as the words themselves. And they are the special concern of the art editor. Here, for instance, are some typical covers of past issues of the Saturday Evening Post. Post covers have long reflected a changing America, with all the warmth, the whimsy, and humor of its daily experiences. The paintings of nearly every great American illustrator have appeared in the Post and other Curtis magazines. This is a picture by one of the greatest of them all, one of the most popular, most loved of contemporary artists, Norman Rockwell. For years, Rockwell has continued to amuse, charm, and inspire millions of Americans. His good friend, George Hughes, also a Post cover artist and one of the country's leading illustrators, frequently visits Rockwell in the latter's Stockbridge, Massachusetts studio. Millions of people have a good laugh each week at the cartoons of Ted Key, creator of Hazel, probably America's best-known maid of all work. The first step in the reproduction of an illustration is the photographing of the original. By means of color filters, a negative is made of each of the primary colors, yellow, red, and blue, and a fourth for the black. By means of a specially designed screen, photographic images in each of the color negatives are broken into various sized dots on film or plate. As an example only, this micrographic original illustrates the screened face of the boy. These in turn are printed on sensitized copper. The screened image is protected by an acid-resisting top, and the unprotected areas etched away in a chemical bath. A progressive proof is printed after the 4 plates have been given the first etch or... A careful comparison shows where corrections and color adjustments will improve the fidelity of the reproduction. Meanwhile, the author's words are being readied for type. Perforations in a paper ribbon are being monotyped from the checked and corrected form of the original text. This ribbon is then fed into a machine that miraculously casts each character and assembles them into columns of type called galleys. Line after line, about 2 letters every second, the completed type is pushed out of the machine, stacked in perfect order, and ejected onto the type platform. Proofs are immediately run off and carefully checked by proofreaders, who make any corrections that are necessary. A visual or paste-up of each page is accurately assembled, with the exact size and position of each element properly represented. Then, both text and original engravings are assembled into one unit, following the paste-up exactly. The completed form is then ready for the foundry. To speed the operation, several plastic molds are made of each form. Each mold is sprayed with a silver coating. And in the electroplating tanks, where it is first coated with nickel and then a thicker coating of copper, the resulting shell then becomes the printing surface of the press plate. In the casting box, a measured amount of molten metal is poured to back up the plate. The curved cast plate is removed and the rough edges are trimmed. It is then given a final shaping so it will exactly fit the curved cylinder of the press. After the finished electrotype is given a coating of chrome to enable the plate to print many impressions without wear, it is ready for the big presses. Meanwhile, technicians are matching ink of every hue and shade to exactly reproduce the colors of the progressive proof. Curtis presses consume more than 13 million pounds of ink each year. And now it is time to go to press. Each press, over 3 stories high, can print more than 600,000 pages in 4 or 5 colors every hour. The jaws of the press swing open for the pressman to position the curved plates on the steel cylinders. As each color is printed, it must be in exact register with the color printed before it, or the printed image will be blurred. To ensure a perfect reproduction, plates must be locked in position to the accuracy of 1/1000th of an inch. The ink reservoirs and the ink rollers are ready to spread the ink on the plate. The paper is at start on a swift journey through the presses, at speed of over 1,600 feet per minute. The great jaws of the press slowly close and the press run is about to start. The pressman gives the signal, controls are set, and the giant begins to come to life. Faster and faster whirl the inking rollers and plates until a river of paper is racing by. In less than 11 seconds from the time the white paper started on its journey, it falls clear of the press in perfectly printed on one side with as many as 5 colors, heated to instantly dry the ink, cooled, turned and printed on the other side with 1 to 5 colors, heated to dry, cooled, slit into page width ribbons, folded and cut into 12-page signatures at a speed even the eye finds difficult to follow. The press rolls on to the end of the run, and the folded pages begin the next step in their journey to become part of another issue of a Curtis magazine. The folded pages are dropped onto a moving chain, each group in its proper sequence. When they are all in place, they pass through an automatic caliper so sensitive it can detect one page too few or one page too many. One page missing or one page too many, and the machine automatically discards the imperfect copy. To make a sturdy magazine, the cover is glued to the inside pages and stitched with wire. It takes more than 26,000 miles of wire a year to bind Curtis publications. The magazines are trimmed and placed on a conveyor which carries them to be addressed and shipped to their final destination. The Journal and Holiday are bound in a different manner. They move along this conveyor to be side-stitched, a binding method designed to give them a durable square back. The pages fall on top of each other, forming a complete magazine. After stitching, a roller applies glue to the square back. The cover goes in place on Holiday and on the Journal. The magazines are then trimmed to precise dimensions. The magazines now are ready. The address plates have been typed. The names of more than 8 million subscribers to all Curtis magazines have been printed on the mailing labels. Behind these millions of names and behind the millions of newsstand sales is still another vital chapter in the story of modern magazine magic. The important chapter titled Circulation. Like any product, no matter how appealing it may be, magazines must be sold. Salesmanship is the driving force that makes all this distribution possible. With all these aids, the hard work of hundreds of men and women in the circulation department make possible this huge volume of orders for subscriptions and newsstand copies. But now the magazines are addressed and bundled and put into mail sacks on their way to be loaded in freight cars and sent to their destinations. The job of routing enough magazines to completely bury a small city belongs to the traffic department. It has long been a Curtis practice to see that everyone in the United States, whether he buys a magazine through subscriptions or on the newsstand, receives it the same day. Every possible method of transportation is used to assure delivery on time. Behind millions of posts, journals, holidays, and Jack and Jills lies a system which speeds magazines from Philadelphia and Sharon Hill to dozens of major distribution centers. Your subscription copy may travel by freight and by mail. Your newsstand copy was probably handled by one of the local magazine wholesalers. And here our story, which began with the felling of a tree, with the writing of an article, or the painting of an illustration, nears its end. For this has been the story of magazine magic, of the printed word, written to be read today or tomorrow, written to invite reflection. Comprehensive, timely, truthful, aware of its responsibilities as it is of its opportunities. Here is the record of our times, our culture, our economy, preserved for the scrutiny and judgment of our contemporaries and the generations yet to come. It is a tale of American industry and American invention, producing one of the most powerful educational and economic forces of our time, as modern as today's news. Modern magazine magic, one of the truly great media of communication between men.
Aha! Well, it's easy to see that you've got a sharp eye for Bob, Mr. Jones, and the little lady, too. All right, I'm going to try to sell this car. And what's more, when I tell you where I got it, I know you're going to want to buy it. This car was owned by a little old maid school teacher. She never drove it any faster than 25 miles an hour, and she never drove it any farther than across town and back. That's the honest truth. She drove it to school, she drove it to church. She treated this car like a piece of fine old Dresden china. Parked it in the shade every time. Never even really warmed the engine up. Now, Mr. Jones, I know that you know machinery. With that kind of treatment, this engine has got to be in first-class condition. Now, am I right or am I wrong?
Well, if Honest Jake wants an honest answer, he's dead wrong. Because if that little old lady really did the kind of stop-and-go cold engine driving Jake says she did, the chances are her engine is one of the worst on Jake's lot. It's almost certain to be loaded with water, unburned gasoline, rust, corrosion, and sludge. That car is not an exceptional case either. In fact, it's typical of millions. A recent national survey tells the whole story in one startling figure. 2/3 of all auto trips these days are under 8 miles. That means most cars are being used most of the time for neighborhood driving. Short trips on a cold engine with continual stopping and starting, creeping and idling. This type of car usage created a big problem and laid it right at our door. Modern engines are designed for power and speed, like this. But they're being used most of the time for an exactly opposite kind of driving, like this. What does this kind of driving do to a modern engine? Well, here's an illustration. The kerosene lamp chimney is like your engine cylinder. This carbon is simply fuel that didn't burn completely because the chimney was cold. The same thing happens in a cold engine cylinder. Choking off part of the lamp's air intake makes the wick smoke, and more carbon forms on the chimney. The same thing happens in an engine cylinder when you run at part throttle before the engine is thoroughly warm, or when you use the choke. But something else happens too. When warm fuel combustion gases strike a cold surface, beads of moisture form at once. In a car cylinder, if this water doesn't get a chance to evaporate, there are only 2 places for it to go. Most of it comes out the exhaust when you start the engine, but some of it will go down past the pistons into the crankcase. In draining crankcases for your customers, you have probably noticed many times that water is often the first thing that comes out. Usually there's some unburned gasoline too, in its original liquid state. But that's not all. Besides carbon, water, and liquid gasoline, there are other things in that oil. We can't tell by looking at it, but if we take that drained oil to a laboratory, those other things can be separated out. The laboratory technicians would do it by an elaborate series of filtrations, distillations, and complicated chemical separations. Let us show you the different things they'd find in that dirty crankcase oil, which started out as the cleanest, purest oil you can make. Half a pint of water, almost a quart of gasoline, a thimbleful of road grit, a cup full of carbon, a thimbleful of metal particles, a couple of jiggers of lead ash, a tablespoon of fuel varnish, a tablespoon of acid. These things were extracted. These are the normal products of neighborhood stop-and-go driving. And when an ordinary motor oil is used, they attack the engine in 3 deadly ways: corrosion, welding by friction, and abrasion, all of which add up to just one thing: wear. Yes, wear. That's what this little pile really is. This metal scraped and rusted off your engine parts a little at a time until the repairman gets you. And don't think that wear isn't expensive. At present prices of repair labor and parts, this lost metal is 75 times more costly than gold. Neighborhood driving? Yes, we can call it that. But the right name for this is heavy-duty driving because it's 15 times more wearing on an engine than open highway travel. Custom-made Havoline has for years been far ahead of its competition in meeting just this problem with an oil that exceeded heavy-duty requirements. And Texaco dealers did a terrific job of merchandising this outstanding oil to their customers. The superiority of custom-made Havoline was particularly evident in preventing hydraulic valve lifter sticking, like this. In the hydraulic valve lifter, the plunger must operate freely in its barrel. In this cutaway unit, we can see that the clearance is very, very small. A bit of grit or varnish thicker than 1/10 of a hair means trouble. Now here's a valve lifter that's stuck on a late model car using a competitive oil. It's hard to see what made it stick. But there it is, a thin collar of fuel varnish. Because the trouble was neglected, the camshaft kept on beating against the lifter until its base was hollowed out like a soup bowl. The repair bill was a whopper, because in addition to the other work, a new camshaft had to be installed. But Texaco's scientists and research men had seen these problems coming and were working on them far in advance. And last fall, the results of this work were seen all over America. Once again, Texaco showed the way with the introduction of advanced custom-made Havoline. But before it could earn a Texaco label better than custom-made Havoline, it had to pass a grueling series of trials under some of the most extreme conditions science could devise. An extreme pressure test, for instance. Advanced custom-made Havoline was tough, withstanding pressures far beyond anything a car engine produces. But that was only the beginning. Advanced custom-made Havoline had to run the gauntlet of many more tests. Water sensitivity, thermal stability, corrosion protection, oxidation. Those were a few. They all proved one thing. The new oil is unsurpassed by any competitive motor oil. To double-check the laboratory tests, advanced custom-made Havoline hit the road. Last summer, down in San Antonio, Texas, with the thermometer crowding 100, high-speed, high-temperature road tests were run. With advanced custom-made Havoline in their crankcases, the fleet of test cars rolled out. The weather was clear, the sun was hot, and the cars roared across the open plains at 70 to 80 miles an hour. 2 years driving for the average motorist was compressed into a few weeks' time. Tough on an engine? Sure. Tough on a motor oil? Right. But not the toughest kind of driving. For real heavy-duty operation, nothing is worse than low-temperature, low-speed, stop-and-go driving. Another fleet of test cars was sent out with advanced custom-made Havoline in the crankcases. And for 100 days, they went like this. Starting, stopping, accelerating, and idling periods were typical of short-trip suburban driving. Then the cars were parked and the engines were shut off and allowed to get cold. When the engines were completely cold, they were started up again and driven at low speed for another several miles. This was repeated day after day. These were perfect conditions for sticking hydraulic valve lifters and wearing out engines. In both the high and low-speed road tests, the working parts of each engine had been measured and weighed before the tests started. Now, at the finish, the engines were torn down and each part was examined again. A motor oil that permitted excessive wear would never get past this checkpoint. But it soon became apparent that advanced custom-made Havoline was even better than expected. For engine after engine came into the shops showing no appreciable wear at all. The results of the low-temperature road tests, the real heavy-duty driving, were even more impressive. Even after 100 days of cold weather stop-and-go driving, the test engines showed no rust, no valve lifter sticking, no carbon deposits, and no appreciable wear. Here are some of the pistons that took 8,000 miles of this heavy-duty driving with advanced custom-made Havoline. The technical description of advanced custom-made Haviline's performance through all these tests makes pretty complicated reading. But it adds up to this. How does the new oil handle these problems? Well, we can see some of the answers with our own eyes. Let's take some of the carbon we got from the used oil and pour it into two test tubes. One containing advanced custom-made Havoline, and the other a competing oil we shall call Z-Lube. Now we'll shake them up to make sure the carbon is distributed throughout the oils. In a short time, we can see that the ordinary oil on the left allows the carbon to settle out and deposit on the bottom of the tube. Look at the advanced custom-made Havoline on the right. The carbon is held in suspension. The oil does not allow it to settle out and form those harmful engine deposits. This is one kind of protection modern engines must have, and it's the kind of protection advanced custom-made Havoline gives. Here's another demonstration. When road grit accumulates in the oil, no oil can get rid of this abrasive. Let's put a little of this road grit between two pieces of polished glass. It doesn't take much rubbing to scratch the glass pretty badly. And since a glass surface is a great deal harder than engine metal, it doesn't take much imagination to see what grit can do to an engine. So what's the answer? That's right, drain it. Get that dirty oil out of there with its load of carbon, water, acid, grit, and all the rest. But how do you know when to drain? The American Petroleum Institute has a good, sound answer to that question. The average driver ought to change his oil every 1,000 miles. A few cars used mostly for ideal long-distance driving on dustless roads may be able to go 2,000 miles. But millions of cars used mainly for stop-and-go, cold-engine, short-trip driving should have their oil changed every 500 miles. This is real heavy-duty driving, what most of your customers are doing every day. You'll be doing them and yourselves a favor by telling them the facts of life about oil contamination. It'll keep them draining and refilling at safe intervals with advanced custom-made Havoline. In fact, even honest Jake may get religion.
She never drove the car faster than 25 miles an hour. Never really got the engine warmed up. Well, you might think that this would be one of the worst engines in my lot, with all that stop-and-go driving. But it's one of the best, and I'll tell you why. The little lady that owned this car knew her motor oil. She never used anything but advanced, custom-made Havoline, and she changed it every 500 miles. And brother, you know that's still mighty cheap insurance.
Yes, when your customers use advanced, custom-made Havoline, it's the best motor oil their money can buy. it's still mighty cheap insurance for your customers. And for you, it means more money in the till and more profit in the bank.
Did you ever see a fellow who liked writing checks and shelling out his money? Well, you're looking at one now. Here's a check that I get a real kick out of writing. It's a raise, and a nice one, for one of the boys on my driveway. And the funny thing is, it's the same boy that I was thinking of firing not longer than 6 months ago. What happened? Well, now that makes an interesting story. A story that started the day Joe Baker came to work at my station. Joe was a clean-cut fella, bright as they make 'em. I took a fancy to him right off. I said to myself, here was good material. But Joe was a disappointment. You see, he'd had some service station experience, but I'm afraid he belonged to that breed that says, what'll it be, how many, so long, and lets it go at that. 8-step service. That's the thing I tried to get through his head, but couldn't. I gave him our manuals to read. I went through each step with him and explained how sales follow service and what the 8 steps mean to the station and the customer, and eventually to the salesman himself. But still, Joe gave sloppy service, if you could call it service. I guess the only reason I kept the boy on was because of the way he cooperated on cleaning up the station. Now that was one thing I had been able to teach Joe, the importance of a clean station in attracting new customers and holding old ones. Of course, what I had actually said was a clean station plus good products plus service. But I couldn't get through to him somehow on that matter of service. I promised myself I'd give him 1 more week's trial. And if he didn't get going on 8-step service in that time, he could just get going on down the road toward some other job. Well, by golly, that very day something happened that was pretty interesting. A stranger, a fussy-looking old gentleman, his name was Pennington, I learned later, drove into the station. And who should step out to wait on him but young Joe? A nice smile and lots of interest. I thought, boy, this is it. He's at last sold on 8-step service, and he's going to give the old man the works. Well, I was wrong again. I knew it when Joe smeared up the windshield and eagerly held up 5 fingers after asking how many. Now, the minute I saw Mr. Pennington, I knew he was the type who'd be fussy about his car. Sure enough, while Joe was filling the order, he got out and walked around to make sure Joe hadn't spilled any gasoline. Well, fortunately, Joe hadn't, but that was about the only thing he'd done right. Before the old man drove away, Joe called me over and introduced me as his boss. Turns out he was the father of Joe's girlfriend. After he'd pulled out, Joe told me he'd put the bee on Mr. Pennington the night before when he was calling on Katie, and had asked him to come in and give us a try. Well, I thanked Joe for his sales talk, but told him we'd better not call Mr. Pennington a customer until we saw whether he'd come back again. Then I tried once more to impress on Joe what it is that keeps people coming into a station. Cleanliness and quality products make up 2 sides of the triangle, but the foundation for the whole thing is service. 3 days later, the old gentleman did drive into the station again. Ignoring Joe, he motioned to me, mind you, and said, say, could I get you to do something for me? He wanted to know, could I clean his windshield, not smear it. Joe had stopped dead in his tracks, just stood there sort of dazed while I polished the windshield. A few minutes later, Mr. Pennington drove away, happy as a big sunflower. But not Joe. Joe finally came to and rushed up to me, worried out of his wits. Why didn't he want me to wait on him, he asked. Then I hauled off and let him have it. Because I said he wanted good service, just like everybody else wants. And you evidently didn't give it to him last time. Service, my boy, 8-step humble service. The kind I've been trying to drill into you ever since you came to work for me. I told him, too, that anybody could see that the old man's fussy about his car, and those 8 steps of service took care of the big things and the little things he wanted when he drove into a service station. Joe really looked whipped. I guess he was afraid the old man would go home and say something against him to Katie. And with the old man down on him, things might get complicated. Then I got an idea. I told Joe to wait a minute while I drove my car from the back of the lot onto the driveway and parked it out by the SO Extra pump. Next, I told Joe to climb under the steering wheel. I said, now look, my boy, you've read about split personalities. Well, here's where you're going to be one. You're customer Joe Zilch, and I'll give you the 8 steps of service. But you're also Joe Baker's salesman, and you're going to listen while once more I tell you the why on every one of these steps. So I started at what seemed to me the very beginning. I explained to Joe that 8-step service isn't a bunch of theory dreamed up by somebody who never saw a driveway. It's a practical plan that took years to develop. Starting with the old-timers, it came right out of the experiences of men who know their business, men on all kinds of humble service station driveways across the length and breadth of Texas. It's just plain common sense, an easy, quick, natural way to give service, and at the same time to make sales. As a matter of fact, 8-step service is 8-step selling. Then I explained another thing to Joe, that while the steps of service were important, it was his attitude while giving them that would really do the job of making regular customers. I told him that it was the pleasant smile, the lively step, the alert manner that would convince customer Zilch you were glad to help him. And that took me right into step 1, the friendly greeting, plus a smile, plus the use of the customer's name. Good morning, Mr. Zilch, I said in my best driveway manner. So I wouldn't forget, I told Joe at any time during 8-step service another customer enters the drive, recognize his presence. A friendly word will hold him while you finish up with the first customer. Then I went to step 2, cleaning the windshield. This, I told Joe, was a basic service which was given to every driver coming to our driveway. And then and there I showed him how to clean, not smear, a windshield. With a good clean chamois, I wiped the windshield and dried and polished it. Of course, a paper towel would have done just as well. And while I was polishing, I reached over to see if a replacement was needed on windshield wiper arms or blade. I called Joe's attention to how servicing and selling were linked up. The average customer prefers to buy all his car needs at one place. He expects the service station salesman to tell him of his needs. You're not making folks mad when you point out a faulty part. You're helping to protect them. You're building their confidence in you. Then step 3, the order. I made the positive approach when I asked, shall I fill your tank with SO Extra, Mr. Zilch? With that question, I'd asked for the maximum order on the highest quality gasoline. Then I explained to Joe that this was the time to ask for that order on upper cylinder lubricant, too. And after that, I stressed a few more points. I cautioned him about overflow, but told him that filler up meant just that. Sales have been lost for thousands of gallons of gasoline because the salesman left room for another gallon or two in their tank. Then, too, we've found that holding the cap in your hand while you're filling the tank is a foolproof way to be sure it gets replaced. Then I came to step 4, a mighty important step in servicing and selling. That's the step where you sweep out the floorboard on the driver's side. Why was it important? As I explained to Joe, it puts the salesman in position to see the drain tag, the handiest selling tool a driveway salesman has. The drain tag tells him if the customer's car needs a motor oil change, when the chassis was last lubricated, and if another lubrication job's in order, if it's time for transmission or a differential change. for new spark plugs, and so on. Then I showed Joe how step 4 put the salesman in position to release the hood lock on most cars. This would later permit him to check under the hood, his biggest opportunity to make sales. I cautioned him, too, not to forget to clean the headlights as he circled the car to get in position to sweep out the right floorboard. Again, I reminded Joe how natural 8-step service was, how one thing just flowed right out of what went before. For instance, step 4 took you so easily into step 5, under the hood servicing and selling. And boy, once under that hood, what a world of business and products and services were spread out there before you. First, of course, I said, "I'll check your radiator, Mr. Zilch." While I was filling it, I cautioned Joe about overflow. Also about holding the radiator cap in his left hand while servicing so he wouldn't forget to replace it. I told him, too, he should notice the condition of the radiator water. If it seemed rusty or dirty, he should suggest radiator cleaner or rust preventive. Next, the crankcase. If the drain tag had shown it was time for a change, at this point it should be suggested to the customer. "Mr. Zilch, your oil's past the 1,000-mile danger point. Shall I drain your crankcase and refill it with SO Extra motor oil?" If, however, it was not time for a change, the oil level should be checked with a dipstick. And I said check, never guess. Then I gave Joe the positive approach on asking for the order. "Your oil's a quart low, sir. Do you use SO Extra motor oil?" Then, reminding Joe again that customers want the salesman to tell them of their replacement needs, I showed him how to check for extra sales. For instance, when I checked the battery water, a service customers really appreciate, I showed him how I had a chance to look for worn battery cables, even to spot the need for a new battery. I showed him how to check the radiator hose to see if a replacement was needed. Also, how to inspect the fan belt for splits, cracks, and fraying. And how to tell when the belt merely needed tightening. A chance to render the customer a free service that would further convince him of interest in his motoring welfare. I covered everything. How and when to sell antifreeze, spark plugs, a flushing job, filter elements. And of course, I showed Joe how often this under-the-hood selling depended upon the drain tag. I stressed again the importance of not only looking at the drain tag, but also of keeping it accurate and up to date. Well, that brought me to step 6 in humble 8-step service, checking the tires. Naturally, I told him to check with a gauge and to ask the customer about his spare. But mainly, I pointed out to Joe how this step in service gave him a chance to check for smooth tires and a chance to show and sell the customer on Atlas. Step 7, making settlement for the purchase. Well, I purposely found up customer zilch on this one. I don't think Joe will ever forget after that the importance when the sale's cash of mentioning the amount given by the customer, the amount of the sale, then counting back. Step 8, the departure. And to make the thing realistic, Joe stepped on the gas and started out of the station. Well, I really showed my teeth on this one. You know, the smile, the sincere, the friendly smile, the "Thank you, Mr. Zilch, call again, please." Folks like it. It leaves a good impression. When Joe came back over from parking my car, I said, "All right, boy, we finished with 8-step service, but 8-step selling isn't finished even when the customer leaves the driveway. Now take this car on the lubrication rack. I spotted the need for a drain and a lubrication job when I gave the customer step 4. As I swept out the floorboard, I glanced at the drain tag. But the selling on step 4 is going right on here in the lubrication bay. Now here we have a chance to check again, to spot other needs. And remember, need is the first step in a sale. And 8-step selling continues here, too. Not only with these customer record cards that give a case history of every customer's car that has come to us for service, but with these postcards, too. I send them out whenever the records show it's time for other services. Customers appreciate this kind of attention. As I've said before, they expect to be reminded, and 8-step service gives us the opportunity, both on the driveway and later, to remind them. Well, that's the way I got the 8-step story over to Joe Baker. And did he grab it and run? During the next few weeks, and every spare minute I had, I'd watch him out there on the driveway giving the steps of service. Oh, he made some mistakes, sure. And he got pretty discouraged, thinking he ought to sell more than he did at first. But you can't hit every time. And what's more, you can't give all 8 steps of service every time. Some folks are in a hurry. But as Joe found, most of them will wait for something good. And every day, Joe was getting better. Seemed like he got into the spirit of 8-step service, the ease of it, the naturalness. And I guess I'd made an impression when I explained how any increase in salary in any business must always come from an increase in profits. And 8-step service and selling was just what the doctor ordered for increasing a station's profits. Joe, you see, was thinking of Katie. Then one day, I really had a bang. One of our fussiest women customers drove in, one we all kind of dreaded. But Joe stepped right out and gave her the business. Step 1, the greeting. He had tipped his cap, he'd smiled, he'd said, "Good morning, Mrs. Williams." Step 2, clean the windshield, and he made it shine like a mirror. Mrs. Williams was beginning to fall. Step 3, get the customer's order, and he did it right. No spilled gasoline, no forgotten tank cap. Step 4, sweep out the floorboard. And he did a good job, and Mrs. Williams loved it. He glanced at the drain tank, too, and the radiator hose. Step 6, check the tires. Yes, he used the gauge, and he inspected the tread and sidewalls. Step 7, making settlement for the purchase. Smooth as silk the way Joe did it. Step 8, the departure. Hey, but what's this? Joe's getting into the car with Mrs. Williams. Well, that boy has really been selling. When Joe brought the car back, he had sold a motor oil change, a wash and lubrication job, a crankcase flush, and a filter element. Yes, that's the same boy I was about to fire 6 months ago. Fire him? Why, today he's one of the most valuable men on my driveways. Oh, come in, Joe. I've got a little surprise for you.
Gosh, boss, you mean you give me a raise?
Yes, it's a raise, Joe, but I'm not giving it to you. You've earned every dime of it. You remember what I told you once, that any increase in salary must always come from an increase in profits? Well, you've helped me up my profits. With 8-step service, you're doing 8-step selling, putting me, and therefore yourself, way over in the black. Well, let's go to work, Joe.
Check, charge, capacitest. These are the 3 C's that sell. Think of them whenever you look at a battery. The 3C plan is an easy plan, for it leads from one step right into the next one. You've got to check to charge. You've got to charge before you can run a capacitest. And if the capacitest shows the battery is worn out, you've taken a big step toward selling a new battery. You've established need. When you combine the 3 C's to discover a defective battery before it actually wears out, you perform a real service for your customer. And remember, sales follow service. Number one in this winning combination is checking batteries. In your own station, check your Atlas batteries when you receive them from the warehouse. Check them again before placing in customers' cars. On your driveway, check the battery in every car that drives in unless the customer's in a hurry and asks you not to. And in your lubrication bay, always make a battery check and record its condition on the work order or report card. Atlas surveys show that out of every 100 batteries checked, 5 new batteries were sold, plus 20 recharge jobs. That's good business. One of the keys to getting this business is the Atlas Battery Water Servicer. Keep it handy right out on the pump island. Be sure it contains plenty of distilled water and that the battery meter and the hydrometer are in the compartments provided for them. Checking battery water is a good way to get under the hood, and it's a service that customers like. Before you actually test the battery, though, ask the customer to turn on his lights for a couple of minutes. This removes any surface charge from the battery plates. Incidentally, here's a good time to look for burnt-out bulbs. If you're checking with a battery safety meter before adding water, examine the battery to determine if it's a 1270 and higher gravity type, which corresponds to the top scale on the meter, or if it's a 1250 to 1269 full charge type, which corresponds to the bottom scale. After the lights have been on for at least 2 minutes, be sure and turn them off before taking the meter reading. Put the red prong on the positive post of the first cell, and put the black prong anywhere on the other terminal of the first cell. As you check the reading, hold the dial so the customer can see the needle for himself. Now, without turning the prongs, move to the other end of the battery to check that cell. And as before, consult the dial for a reading. Finally, reverse the position of the prongs and place them anywhere on the connectors of the center cell to take its reading. If all 3 readings have been in the green or serviceable area, and if no more than 6 scale points have separated the highest and lowest readings, then the battery is in good shape. But if 1 reading is in the serviceable area and 2 readings are in the recharge area, yet no more than 6 points separate the highest and lowest reading, the condition of the battery is just fair and it needs recharging. Of course, a capacitest should follow a recharge. However, as in the case of our customer, if 1 reading is in the serviceable area and 2 readings are in the recharge area and more than 6 points separate the highest and lowest readings, interpret them to your customer to show that the battery is in poor condition and recommend a recharge as a preliminary to a capacitest. When you inform your customer that his battery is just fair or poor, he may confront you with a statement that nevertheless he's still able to start his car. Warn him that even so, his battery will probably go out suddenly. Stress the fact that you're trying to save him this inconvenience with its delay and expense. The Atlas Battery Safety Meter is a quick and convincing tool for showing a customer when he needs a recharge and a capacitest, for he can see for himself the actual and accurate evidence. And by the way, don't forget that you offered a check of battery water as an inducement to get under the hood. So be sure and fulfill this service to your customer as promised. Every time you check a battery, you're building towards the sale of either a battery, a recharge, or your other services. Even though you may not sell a new battery or a recharge right then and there, you have put the idea in the customer's mind. When his battery does fail, he'll remember your advice. Chances are you'll see him again. The hydrometer provides another method for checking batteries, and every man in the station should know how to use it. It's the station manager's responsibility to see that each new employee becomes familiar with this valuable sales and service tool. Usually, a demonstration or 2 and a few words of explanation are all that are necessary. First, remove the vent caps and place them bottom side up on top of the battery. If the solution is below the plates and you have to add water to cover them, Ask the customer to drive around for a while and then come back later after the solution is properly mixed. But if the level of the solution is okay, squeeze the bulb and put the hydrometer tube down into the cell. Slowly release the pressure on the bulb and draw up just enough of the solution to cause the hydrometer float to rise and float freely. In taking hydrometer readings, be sure to check the temperature of the solution. The reason for this is the solution expands when heated and shrinks when cooled. However, most hydrometers show you how to compensate for any variation in temperature. The reading on the stem of the float at the surface of the liquid is the hydrometer reading of the solution in the cell. Keep the tube vertical, and when you've taken readings for all cells, explain them to the customer. If the readings are uniform, but 1225 or lower, the battery may need only recharging. If the readings differ by 60 points or more, and the case is not leaking, one or more cells may be worn out or shorted, or the battery may need only recharging. In either case, recommend a recharge to the customer to be followed by a capacitest. Here's an important point. Both the battery meter test and the hydrometer test are accurate means for determining state of charge, but neither test can determine the capacity condition of the battery. Only a capacitest will show you this. Now, number 2 of the 3 C's that sell, charge. If your service to a customer has included regular battery checks from time to time and you've kept him posted as to its condition, chances are you'll be the first person he thinks of when his battery does fail him. Even though he may not have heeded your warnings, very often he'll return to you when trouble finally occurs. To prepare his battery for charging, remove the cell caps and adjust the solution in all cells until the plates are barely covered. This is extremely important. Then replace the vent caps on all but the center cell. Be sure the vent holes in the caps are open, and if the battery is equipped with a self-leveling device, be sure it's open too. Set the charge control to off and the scale selector to charge position. If the battery to be charged is in the car, disconnect one cable in order to prevent damage to clocks, radios, and other accessories. Be sure to connect the charger clip marked positive to the battery post or connection marked positive. The same goes for the negative clip, for if the terminals are not matched, excessive sparking results. This can damage the sensitive mechanism of the charger. During the charging process, the battery heats up, so insert the thermostat in the center cell. If charging continues after a battery reaches 125 to 130 degrees, the battery can be damaged severely. The thermostat automatically shuts off the charger when it reaches this danger point. Now press the charger starting button and adjust the charging knob until a 100 ampere charging rate is reached. SAE engineers have determined through extensive experiments that this 100 amp charging rate will give the maximum amount of safe charge in the minimum time. This safe charging rate is what your customer wants, for speed without safety is not economy. The exception to this rule is during really hot weather, 90 to 100 degrees. Then a rate of 70 amperes or lower is recommended. Otherwise, the thermostat may shut off the charger before the battery is fully charged. In some extreme cases, it may be necessary to cool the battery down before it can be charged. The average charging time at 100 amps is between 30 minutes and an hour and a half. Of course, at 70 amperes, unless there's trouble with the cells, such as excessive shedding, it takes longer. When the battery solution reaches 125 degrees, the charger equipped with a thermostat turns off automatically, and the starting button returns to normal position. The on-charge indicator light also goes out, and the buzzer will sound until the charging control knob is turned off. The battery now has received the maximum safe charge, and you're ready for the third C in the 3C plan, the capacitest. A capacitest should always be made within 10 minutes after charging is completed, because most testers are designed to operate accurately only at 125 degrees, the temperature of the battery immediately after charging. If the scale shows green, the battery has sufficient power to operate the car. If the scale shows yellow, battery condition is doubtful, although sometimes a longer charge at a slower rate may bring the battery up to the proper level. Finally, if the scale shows red, as in our customer's case, the battery does not have sufficient capacity for satisfactory service, and it's your cue to start talking about a new battery. Show the customer the scale. That's pointing out need, the first step in selling. The second step is telling the story of your product. With Atlas batteries, you've got a powerful story to tell. Atlas quality, the Atlas warranty. 38,000 Atlas dealers across the United States and Canada are ready to service and make adjustments on Atlas batteries 7 days a week. In selling batteries, always start with your best battery, the heavy-duty Quality Plus battery. If necessary, you can come down to an A battery, or if the customer has limited means, to the K battery. Within their respective classes, all of these batteries are superior products. When you've sold an Atlas, be sure it's fully charged before you install it. Of course, your battery should be kept on the Protecto charger at all times, but never take one off the rack without first testing it with your battery meter. So there they are, the 3 C's that sell: check, charge, capacitest. And it's a winning combination that means better battery service for your customers. And remember, battery sales will follow good battery service. Call you a humble driveway salesman. But now actually on the driveway, what kind of salesman are you? Are you an order taker, which doesn't really require any salesmanship and doesn't get you anywhere? Or are you the other kind, the man who knows what to say to sell, prepared to use to the limit the time the average customer spends on your driveway? If you're this kind, you're a salesman. You're helping to increase business where you work. You're making your job secure. To sell, you must first discover the customer's need. And humble 8-step service gives you a plan for discovery. Then you must tell the customer of his need and ask him to buy. And here's where knowing what to say does it. Now, it's true that one salesman won't express himself in exactly the same way as another. The thing for you to remember is this: know your product. Talk about it positively. Give the impression that you sincerely want to be helpful with the customer's car needs. Then ask for the order in the way that's natural for you. The more times you ask, the more you'll sell. Now take the step in 8-step service where you ask, or are supposed to ask, for the order. There are a number of ways to do it, and this man knows quite a few. All wrong.
Hi, you lady. What'll it be?
Sometimes he switches.
Hello, Mac. How many?
Or maybe he's brief.
Yeah?
Of course, there's always a different slant.
Need some push water?
Funny? Well, maybe. But he wasn't hired as a comedian. He was hired to sell.
May I fill your tank with SO Extra?
Right. This man's selling. He's asked in such a way it's easy for the customer to say yes. He's used the product name, and he got the order. But he's not through.
May I add a quart of upper cylinder lubricant?
Many customers already know the value of using a solvent lubricant in their gasoline, and when you ask, they'll probably say yes. However, to some customers, you may have to explain that UCL is a refined mineral oil which mixes easily with all gasolines and lubricates the upper cylinders, valves, fuel pump, and carburetor. After you've taken the order for UCL and gasoline and filled the tank, you're ready for the next step in 8-step service, to sweep out the floorboard.
How about the floorboard?
The right way, of course, is simple.
May I sweep out your floorboards?
This service puts you in position to look at the drain tag, the handiest little selling tool ever provided a salesman. Your market on 9 big items plain as day before you. Be particularly sure to check the mileage of the last motor oil change against present mileage. Also, when chassis was last lubricated. You may need these facts later to reinforce your selling sentences. Now to get under the hood. Well, there are several ways to do it, but this isn't one of them. Nor is asking your customer,
How's your oil?
well, now, how could he know? He's sitting in his car. That's your job. The right way is easy.
May I check under the hood for you, sir?
When you say this, you're offering a service people appreciate. Once under the hood, check everything. And when you come to the crankcase, remember what the drain tag and the speedometer told you. But remember, too, that we now base our recommendations for an oil change on type of service rather than on mileage. In most cases, however, a 1,000-mile recommendation is still a good one.
May I change your oil? I notice it's past the 1,000-mile danger point.
If the customer knows the importance of regular changes, he'll probably say yes. But in most cases, you'll have to sell a little more. Here are some important points to give him. The average run of cars is still safe with 1,000-mile changes. However, if the car is used exclusively in severe service, for instance, stop-and-go city traffic, then the customer may need to change his oil before 1,000 miles. The thing that happens is this. Oil becomes contaminated to death with dust, water from condensation in the crankcase, and acid and carbon from the engine. Explain that the oil is like the water you wash your hands in. It becomes contaminated after a short time. Remember, it's type of service, not miles driven, that determine the change interval of a motor oil. If the customer seems hurried, you could vary your pitch.
Your oil's past the 1,000-mile danger point, sir. We can change it for you in less than 3 minutes.
If the oil in the crankcase is low and an ad is indicated, not a change, it's your cue to ask for the order.
Your oil's a quart low. Shall I add a quart of SO Extra motor oil?
If customers tell you they want a heavy-duty motor oil, assure them that SO Extra is just that, exceeding all specifications for a heavy-duty oil. But remember, the way to sell motor oil is by checking and asking. Checking dipstick and drain tag, asking for the order. Surveys made on humble driveways show oil sales can actually be increased just by asking, so don't hesitate to ask. And don't forget to ask the new car owner to put Humble's revolutionary motor oil Uniflow in his crankcase. There's only one way, the right way, to sell Uniflow. Give him the 4,000-mile knock story. Tell him about the formation of deposits in the first mile of driving and how they'll build up for every additional mile. Show him the importance of putting Uniflow in his crankcase as quickly as possible. And by the way, for any car coming to your driveway using SAE 20 oil or lower, you should recommend Uniflow. Now about selling filter elements. The figures on the drain tag can help you here, too. Learn to remember those figures the way you remember your cards in a card game. A good memory pays off either place. And if the filter hasn't been changed in 5,000 miles, tell the customer about it.
Your filter's been driven 5,000 miles. Shall I put in a new Atlas filter for you?
While you're under the hood, you should, of course, always make a quick check of the fan belt for cracks and fraying. If you find either condition, you should tell the customer. You might remind the customer that it's safer to put on a new belt now rather than have it break on the road. Also, that old grease-soaked belts often stretch, causing the generator to operate improperly. While you're under the hood, feel the water hose too. If it's soft and spongy, tell the customer about its condition.
Shall I put on a new Atlas hose before this old one starts leaking?
If the drain tag shows the spark plugs have seen over 10,000 miles of use, it's time to pitch for another sale.
These spark plugs have been driven over 10,000 miles. I can check them on the spark plug tester for you in a few minutes.
Now about battery sales. The best way is by checking constantly with a hydrometer or the battery meter. You should do this both on the driveway and with every lubrication job. If the battery shows up weak, ask the customer how old his battery is. This gets him to thinking about his battery. Tell him that a recharge may prevent sudden and complete failure. Also, that it will give a better test of the battery's condition. If on recharging the battery doesn't come up to the proper level, tell the customer this and suggest your best battery, the Atlas HD. And here's where you tell the Atlas warranty and quality story. Remind the customer that the Atlas is the highest quality battery he can buy, far exceeding SAE specifications, and that the Atlas warranty is honored by 38,000 dealers from coast to coast. Now about checking tires.
What do you carry in your tires?
Well, most people carry air. And here's another thing. Don't ask a man sitting in his car how his air is. He's inside, remember? And then check with a gauge. With a gauge, please, not that way. And check that spare, too.
Shall I check your tires?
If the customer says yes, ask him what pressure, even though you know the manufacturer's recommendations. The customer may have a preference. Incidentally, even new tires may become damaged through cuts or bruises. If you find a tire that is damaged or worn, and you feel it's time to suggest a new one, don't hesitate to ask the customer to get out of his car and take a look with you. Point out the inconvenience, even the danger in driving on worn tires. Then you're ready to try for a sale.
Shall I put on a new Atlas tire and tube for you, sir?
Of course, before you try to sell a tire, be sure you know the important sales features of Atlas tires. Remember, Atlas tires give longer wear, easier riding, and are backed by the unconditional Atlas warranty against road hazards. Yes, it's what you say that sells, products as well as services. Washing, lubrication, automatic transmissions, polish jobs, and others. Here are some sentences that have worked for others. Maybe they'll work for you.
May I fill your tank with SO Extra? May I add a quart of upper cylinder lubricant? May I sweep out your floorboard? May I check under the hood for you, sir? Your oil's a quart low. Shall I add a quart of SO Extra motor oil? You can keep new car performance longer with Humble's Uniflow motor oil.
So keep in mind the way to sell your products and services. Discover the need through 8-step service. Point out that need to your customers. Ask them to buy by knowing what to say to sell. Naturally, you won't use all these questions on every customer. Good judgment should tell you what and when. But don't be an order taker. Be a salesman. Remember, it's what you say that sells. see, is a real operator. He's using a lot of common sense about these automatic transmissions. After all, 1 out of 8 cars on the road today has them, and servicing them is profitable and simple when you follow the humble charted lubrication guide. Now, a few months ago, things were different with Joe. Much of his spare time was taken up with thoughts far removed from servicing automatic transmissions, such as the day when Bill Willard, a humble technical serviceman, dropped in for a visit. Now, Bill has as great an appreciation for figures as the next guy. But it wasn't long till he had Joe looking at some other figures. Figures denoting additional profits, of course, from servicing the automatic transmissions of his customers' cars. Joe found that it's really a simple procedure, nothing difficult nor mysterious about it. In fact, with a proper procedure, it's easy. But of course, before doing any job properly, you've got to have the right tools. A handy board with all the tools needed to service automatic transmissions is inexpensive, around $12. Only a few special tools are required, but you should make sure to use the right tool on the right bolt. And cleanliness, that's mighty important too. Tools, and especially cans and spouts, should be absolutely clean, as no dirt should get into the transmission. And now for your step-by-step procedure using Humble's Charted Lubrication Guide, sometimes referred to as Check Chart. It's all there, all you need to know, and all you have to do is follow it. Incidentally, don't try to apply lubrication procedures from memory. You can't possibly hope to keep in your head the many requirements, the great number of details necessary to know about each model automobile. Make it automatic. Reach for your lubrication guide. Now, to get this business, you're going to have to make a practice of checking the fluid level on automatic transmissions every 1,000 miles or once a month, along with regular car lubrication. The fluid must be warm, around 150 degrees Fahrenheit when checked. Since it expands when heated, a reading with the fluid cold would be inaccurate. Set the handbrake firmly and set the selector lever in the neutral position, indicated of course by the letter N. With this done, start the engine and let it operate at a speed equivalent to 20 miles an hour for 2 or 3 minutes. Then cut it down to slow idle and let it run. Your next job is to locate the dipstick and fill pipe. A simple table in the Humble Charted Lubrication Guide shows you where to look for a dipstick and fill pipe for each type of car. In this car, the Oldsmobile, as in most other cars, you'll find the dipstick under the floor pan. To get to it, you'll have to roll back the right side of the front floor mat and remove the inspection hole cover. First, of course, you should clean all surfaces thoroughly to make sure no dirt or grit falls into the transmission when the dipstick is removed. Now, before we actually check the level, our next step is to see where the selector lever should be. Our guide says that for the Oldsmobile, the position is neutral. Of course, that's just where we set the lever at the beginning of our checking procedure. But other cars may be different, so see your lubrication guide to be sure in any situation. Now, during all the steps that follow, keep the engine running at slow idle. Now, with the inspection hole cover removed, you're ready to take out the dipstick. Have a clean rag handy and wipe the stick until it's clean. Then reinsert it in the transmission to full depth and make sure the dipstick goes down all the way. Remove the dipstick again, and this time note the reading. The 2 lines on the dipstick are marked F for full and L for low. To raise the level from L to F in an Oldsmobile, 1.5 to 2 pints of SO automatic transmission fluid 55 are required, depending upon the car model. If the level is at or below the L mark, add enough fluid to bring the level to F. Now, here are a couple of warnings. Be sure the can and spout are clean. And above all, don't fill above the full mark on the dipstick. This will cause foaming, overheating, and leakage when the car is operated. Now it's time to shut off the engine and replace the dipstick. Cover the inspection hole, and of course put the floor mat back where it belongs. Finally, take the cover off the seat and the job's done. Well, that's the way to check and add, and it's simple when you follow the ABCs of Humble's charted lubrication. Oh, one more thought. If you see indications of oil leakage or mechanical difficulty, be sure and refer the owner to his automotive dealer for further checking. Now, let's follow the chart through the various steps necessary to drain and refill the automatic transmission on a typical late model car. Once again, we've selected the Hydromatic drive for our demonstration because more makes of cars have the Hydromatic than any other type. Of course, if you learn to follow the chart with Hydromatic, you can follow it with any other. Humble charted lubrication saves you lots of headaches, keeps you from removing the wrong drain plugs, warns you of the differences in the various transmissions, and takes you through a foolproof routine that gets the job done correctly and easily. Working with the car on the lift makes it handier for you to reach transmission pan and coupling drain plugs. Also, it provides disposal for the oil that will drain out, in some cases as much as 14 quarts. Always have transmission fluid warm before draining. That's a must. To drain, simply remove the hex head plug in the transmission oil pan. Incidentally, depending upon the make and model of the car, this drain plug may be found at the front, side, or rear of the pan. The simple diagrams in the chart will show you. The next job is to drain the fluid coupling. To do this, remove the small flywheel housing cover plate. On some cars, you'll find a flywheel bottom cover. Whichever it is, remove it. Then, with a special turning tool or a heavy bladed screwdriver, rotate the flywheel until the drain plug is at the bottom center. Now be careful not to break or chip the flywheel gear teeth. Now, with a 6.7/16" socket wrench, remove the flywheel drain plug. On earlier model Hydromatics, use a 3/16" Allen bit tool for this job. Check the oil pan drain plug gasket after both the transmission case and fluid coupling have drained, and if the gasket's okay, put the plug back in and tighten it. Of course, if the gasket's not in good condition, replace it. Do the same thing for the flywheel drain plug. Then reinstall the small housing cover plate or lower flywheel housing cover, whichever it is, depending upon the make and model of car. With the under the chassis part of the job finished, lower the lift, then cover the front seat to protect the upholstery, just as you did when you were making a level check. And as you did before, roll back the right side of the front floor mat to get at the inspection hole cover. Remove any dirt, sand, or lint from around the floor pan opening, and also clean around the dipstick. Now, take the dipstick out of the oil fill pipe and be sure and clean the dipstick air cleaner in mineral spirits, solvent, or kerosene. Next, slowly pour SO automatic transmission fluid 55 into the transmission in the amount of about 2/3 of the total capacity. For this car, that will be about 8 quarts. Be sure the container and spout are clean. Now, set the selector lever in neutral position indicated by N, start the engine, and run it at a speed equivalent to 20 miles an hour for about 1.5 minutes. This will fill the fluid coupling. Then cut the engine down to slow idle and let it run. This time, add enough SO automatic transmission fluid to bring the level just below the L mark on the dipstick. Continue to run the engine until the fluid reaches the operating temperature, which takes about 3 minutes. You will note that on making another level check, that the fluid is near the F mark. Heat has caused expansion. So add enough additional fluid to bring the level up to F, or full. You should rely entirely on the readings of your dipstick and not on any chart giving recommended capacities when you add this final amount of fluid. And remember, don't fill above full, as foaming and leakage will result. Finally, stop the engine, replace the dipstick and the cover, return the floor mat to its original position, then remove the seat cover, and the job is done. Quite a few steps, true, but they're easy, logical steps, and they go fast when you follow humble charted lubrication. And don't forget to observe this caution. Never flush Hydromatic or any of the other automatic transmissions. They don't require it. Now for a few small differences which you'll run across in other transmissions. Things you'll need to know to make the job easier. In the Dynaflow, beginning with the late 1949 Buicks, you'll find the dipstick between the battery and the engine under the right-hand side of the hood. This is also true for some 1951 Oldsmobiles. Now be careful not to confuse the transmission fluid dipstick with the engine dipstick located nearby in the crankcase. Also in the Dynaflow, be on guard for 2 accumulator plugs which can easily be mistaken for drain plugs. These accumulator plugs should not be removed. Follow this simple rule. The transmission oil pan is always toward the rear, behind the crankcase. When you've located it, remove the drain plug, then turn your attention to the torque converter housing cover. The torque converter and the fluid coupling serve essentially the same purpose, and both must be drained. Torque converters have 2 drain plugs. Now loosen, but do not remove one of the plugs to give an air vent. Then rotate the flywheel 1/2 turn, and in the exact opposite position, you'll find the second plug. Remove it so the oil can drain. Now here's another place where you'll find some differences to be on the lookout for. In the amounts required to fill the converters or fluid coupling on the various cars. 8 quarts are required for the Hydromatic, 7 quarts for the Ultramatic, 5 quarts for Mercomatic, Fortomatic, and Studebaker. In the Dynaflow and Power Glide, you'll add only 3 quarts of fluid first, then after that enough to bring the level up to full, as shown on the dipstick. Humble Charted Lubrication gives you this information. Follow its check chart. Yes, that's the way to do it. There's nothing mysterious, nothing complicated about servicing automatic transmissions. Today, not only Joe, but all the boys in his station know the formula and they follow it. They know that when servicing automatic transmissions, these things are important. The right tools. Keep them clean. Keep dirt out of the transmission. Don't flush. Don't overfill. And always, that's right, Joe, let's emphasize it, always follow the check chart. It's easy, it's automatic.